However, back before I get to Chapter 5, Lecture 3, I want to just review real fast what I did in the last lecture. I forgot to mention up here that supply of labor, again, upper sloping line, is a positive relationship between the wage and the amount of labor offered for employment. So you give workers higher wages, more workers will enter the labor force because they would be paid more. The demand for labor come from the employers is a negative relationship. They don't like high wages, they prefer low wages, and so if wages are high, they would hire less people. All things being equal, if wages come down, they would hire more people. And that's what happened here when the wage came down because we had a lot of surplus of labor. Workers competing each other for jobs drove the wage down. That led to some workers leave the job market. The quantity supplied went down, so the wage falls. That caused the quantity supply to go down. It caused the quantity demanded to go up as more employers hire workers, and they move this way, down to the right along demand, and that's more people being hired, people leaving the labor market until we get to wage W star, where now we're back in equilibrium. So this keeps happening until quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and then the surplus labor is gone, and unemployment is no longer a problem. So to summarize, according to classical economics, competitive labor markets will bring about full employment all by itself. If there's a surplus of labor, which is unemployment, wages will fall, which will induce more hiring. Also note that according to classical economics, if the labor market gives us full employment, then the labor market also gives us full employment level of GDP. So they give us the maximum level of GDP. So the labor market, if you leave it alone, gives us full employment, meaning no unemployment, as well as maximum production, maximum GDP. Now, another problem is what happens if people don't buy the things produced. I talked about earlier that if we produced, say, $10,000 billion worth of goods and we don't buy all those goods right here, if we only spend $8,000 billion, then $2,000 billion worth of goods have not been sold, and they're lying around in warehouses, and that's a problem. To keep the economy at the same level of production, we need people to take their $10,000 billion of income and spend it all. If we save a big portion of it, in this case we're saving 20% of what we've earned, which means 20% of the goods produced have not been sold. That means there's a large inventory sitting around, which is not good for businesses. If you run a department store or a warehouse store and a lot of your goods are not being sold, then you're going to cut back on your orders, which will cause the warehouses to have problems as well. Manufacturing will start laying off, and whole supply chain is going to be hit with less sales, less production, and that could be quite recessionary. Well, classical economics says not really, can't happen. And this goes back to the 19th century with a French economist who was a follower of Adam Smith, J.B. Say, argued that demand did not matter in a market-based economy. So sales would not be a problem. He argued that insufficient demand was not a problem for the macroeconomy. And this has been a main debate between currently the classical school of economics, which still exists, and the school of Keynesian economics. And they're quite opposed. Classical economics is driven by a law from J.B. Say, known as Say's law. And the law is right here. The law states that the very act of production will generate enough income to produce society with enough spending to purchase all goods produced. Supply creates its own demand. Now, it is true that when you produce, you do generate income equal to what you produce, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's all going to be used for demand. So how can we guarantee that every dollar earned through production will be spent? We need that because we need all $10,000 billion of goods produced in my example above to be purchased for the manufacturers to produce $10,000 billion again next time period to keep employment at the same level. So the question is, what about saving? Can that be detrimental to the economy? And the classical people say no, because there is another market that will fix the problem, and that's called the money market. The money market is our second macro market. First one was labor market. And this market matches the buyers and sellers of funds for loans. So this down here is a quantity of money for loans. And the price of money is the interest rate. If you want to borrow money, you have to be charged a rate of interest. If you put money in the bank, they'll pay a rate of interest, and that's as a percent. So the price of money is the interest rate. If you sell money, supply money, that means you deposit money into a bank, you are a saver. And so the suppliers are your savers. Savers. And then the ones who demand money are the ones who are going to borrow. Borrowers. And let's say we're in equilibrium right here. Let's say our equilibrium interest rate maybe 6%, just make up a number. And down here I'll just call it Q1, amount of money. Now let's say that people start to save more money. So this would be the first one, called S1 from savers. Let's say they start to save more money. Supply shifts out to the right. Remember, this is going out to the right. That's an increase in supply. Well, what happens is that at 6%, we no longer have this much being saved. Now we have this much being saved. So this would be our new quantity supply. It used to be here, but now it's going to be there because of the change in supply. Remember, this one is gone, and that's now where the supply is. In terms of how much money is being borrowed, that was not changed. That's still there. That's your quantity demanded. So what we have here is a surplus of money. And that will be problematic for the economy because that money is not being used out there to buy things. That money that was the increase in the supply came from people earning that money through production. And now if they don't spend that money, then that means goods will not be sold. The classical people say don't worry about it. The market will take care of that. If you have a surplus of anything, we saw in chapter 3, the price is going to come down. What we have here is a lot of money sitting in banks. Banks are in competition with one another. They're going to have to drive down the rate of interest to attract more customers. And so that would cause people to borrow money this way, move down to the right along demand. And right there, more people come to banks to borrow money, which is good. They borrow the money to spend it. And down here, some of our people who are saving money reduce their savings because now it's not as attractive in terms of the interest rate. So the quantity supply goes back down until we get to a new equilibrium right here. Maybe at 4%. And I'll call this maybe Q star is our new equilibrium quantity. So what's happened is that the problem of too much savings went away with lower interest rates. So the problem with too much or surplus of labor is a lower wage, and the solution to too much savings is a lower interest rate. So according to classical economics, any problem of too much saving is self-corrected by the money market. Once the market reaches equilibrium, all the money saved is put back into the economy through investment and other forms of borrowing. And this is the self-correcting nature of capitalism that classical economics promotes. So down here, the last sentence, this is probably the one thing, if you're going to remember anything about classical economics, is right here. Sure, there might be a small disruption or downturn in the economy. Could be, again, a little bit of unemployment. It could be a lack of a large demand right now. But this disruption or downturn will be minor, so not a very powerful effect, have a small impact on the economy. Temporary, short term, and above all, probably the most important term is self-correcting. Self-correcting means what for government? It means stay out, laissez-faire. So government should not come in to try to address any kind of problem of unemployment or lack of demand because the economy itself is self-correcting. If the government comes in, they'll just mess things up. Government should stay out and allow the economy to self-correct. And this was the dominant economic philosophy up until a time period when things were not self-correcting, which was the Great Depression. And that led to a new economic school of thought known as Keynesian economics. And that'll be the topic of our next lecture.